The city was a beast of steel and ice, its breath a bitter wind that stole the warmth from bones and the hope from hearts. It was a place of a million hurried footsteps, each one a tiny, lonely drumbeat in a symphony of indifference. For Leo, a man whose hands were calloused from building walls for others while his own world had crumbled, the city was a constant reminder of what he had lost. Every skyscraper that clawed at the gray sky was a monument to a life he no longer lived, a dream he had packed away with his wife's paintbrushes and canvases, buried deep in a closet like a treasure too painful to behold. He was a single father, a construction worker, a man whose own foundations had been shaken to the core 5 years ago. Now, his entire world was a 7-year-old girl named Lily, whose laughter was the only blueprint that mattered. Her eyes, the same warm chocolate as her mother's, were the only light that could pierce the perpetual dusk of his grief. Before we continue this story, we'd love to know where you are watching from today. Share your city or country in the comments below, and let's see how far this message of hope can travel. Leo and Lily were a tiny island of two in the vast, cold ocean of the metropolis. Their life was a patchwork of scraped knees, bedtime stories, and the constant, quiet hum of a budget stretched thin. Love was the currency they had in abundance, but it couldn't buy a thicker coat or turn their small, drafty apartment into a fortress against the winter. On this particular evening, as dusk bled into a bruised purple twilight, the wind had a particularly cruel edge. It howled through the urban canyons, rattling windows and chasing scraps of paper like frightened ghosts. Leo held Lily's small, mittened hand tightly, his own jacket pulled taut against the assault of the cold. They were on their way home, their pockets lighter than their spirits, carrying a single bag with a loaf of bread and a carton of milk. Then, he saw her. An old woman, perched on the edge of a frozen stone bench as if she were a fragile, forgotten bird. She was a study in gray, her coat was thin and the color of ash, her hair a wispy cloud of silver, her skin pale and tinged with blue at the lips. People flowed around her like a river around a stone, a relentless current of averted eyes and hurried paces. They saw her, but they did not see her. They registered a shape, an inconvenience, a problem that was not theirs to solve. But Leo saw more. In the tremble of her hands, he saw the fragility of life. In the deep-set weariness of her eyes, he saw a story of sorrow that felt achingly familiar. He saw a human being, drowning in a sea of humanity. He felt a familiar tug-of-war within him. The practical voice, the one worn down by years of struggle, reminded him of the last $20 in his pocket, meant to last until payday. It reminded him of the draft in Lily's room, the need for a new pair of shoes. But another voice, a deeper one that sounded suspiciously like his late wife's, whispered of shared humanity, of the simple, non-negotiable duty to care. Then, a third voice, small and clear as a bell, cut through his turmoil. Lily stopped, her little face scrunched in concern. "Daddy," she whispered, her breath making a tiny cloud in the air. "That grandma looks cold. Her heart must be freezing." Her words were not an accusation, but a simple, profound observation. Her heart must be freezing. It struck Leo with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just looking at a woman suffering from the cold, he was looking at a soul shivering from loneliness. In that instant, the choice was no longer a choice. It was a command from the very core of his being. He squeezed Lily's hand, a silent promise, and changed their course, stepping out of the indifferent river and walking toward the lonely island on the bench. The fate of 3 lives was about to be altered by a single step, an act of kindness offered against the howling wind of a world that had forgotten how. Leo approached the woman cautiously, as one might approach a startled animal. The city's noise seemed to fade into a dull roar, the focus narrowing to this small circle of profound human need. The woman, whose name he would learn was Eleanor, didn't look up at first. Her gaze was fixed on some distant, unseen point, her body curled in on itself as if trying to shrink away from the world's harshness. She was a statue of despair, frozen not just by the dropping temperature, but by a chilling abandonment. "Excuse me, ma'am," Leo's voice was gentle, careful not to startle her. It was a voice accustomed to soothing a child's nightmares, a voice that carried a warmth his worn jacket could not. Eleanor's head lifted slowly. Her eyes, a startlingly clear blue, were clouded with a deep, ancient sadness, but they also held a flicker of something else, a defiant pride that had not yet been extinguished. She looked at Leo, then at the small girl beside him, and her expression was wary, guarded. She had been on this bench for hours, a ghost at the feast of life, and not a single soul had acknowledged her existence until now. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice raspy and weak, yet laced with a tough, protective edge. She expected him to ask for money, to shoo her away, to treat her as a nuisance. Leo saw the walls she had built around herself, and he understood them. He had walls of his own. He simply unzipped his construction jacket, a thick, durable thing that was his primary shield against the elements. "You're freezing," he said, his words a simple statement of fact, not pity. "Please, take this." He held out the jacket. Eleanor stared at it, then back at him, her brow furrowed in disbelief. "No. I couldn't," she protested, though her body betrayed her with a violent shiver. It was Lily who broke through the impasse. She let go of her father's hand, stepped forward, and held out a piece of paper she'd been clutching. It was a drawing she'd made at school that day, a colorful, wobbly sun with a giant smile. "This is for you," Lily said. "To make you warm." The sheer, unadulterated innocence of the gesture did what Leo's words could not. A crack appeared in Eleanor's icy facade. Her lips trembled, and her proud, weary eyes welled with tears. She reached out a trembling hand and took the drawing as if it were a precious jewel. Leo knelt down, so he was at her eye level. "We're just going to that diner across the street," he said, pointing to a brightly lit beacon of warmth. "Let me buy you a hot meal. A coffee, some soup. Please." He saw the battle in her eyes, the war between pride and desperation. He knew that accepting help can sometimes feel like surrender. "It's not charity," he added quickly, sensing her hesitation. It's what people do. Or, what they should do." His sincerity was undeniable. Slowly, Eleanor gave a single, shaky nod. The surrender was not to him, but to the crushing need that her body could no longer deny. Getting her to her feet was a delicate process. Her joints were stiff, her movements frail. Leo offered his arm, and she took it, her grip surprisingly strong. As they crossed the street, shielded by Leo's body against the wind, he felt a profound sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He was no longer just a man struggling to survive, he was a man capable of offering sanctuary. Inside the diner, the warmth and the smell of coffee and frying bacon enveloped them like a blanket. Leo settled Eleanor into a booth, wrapping his jacket around her thin shoulders. He ordered her a full meal, the pot roast special, with hot coffee and a side of soup. He and Lily would share a grilled cheese. As Eleanor ate, life slowly seeped back into her. Color returned to her cheeks. She ate with a quiet dignity, but with the urgency of someone who had not had a proper meal in a long time. They didn't speak much, but a powerful, unspoken connection was being forged in the humble diner booth. When she was finished, a measure of strength had returned to her. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger now. "You have no idea what this means." Leo just smiled. Everyone deserves a little warmth. But as the time came to pay the bill, the daunting reality of his decision returned. What now? He couldn't, in good conscience, send this fragile woman back out into the killing cold. The thought of her on that bench, alone in the dark, was unbearable. He looked at Lily, who was watching Eleanor with wide, compassionate eyes. He looked at Eleanor, who, despite the meal, still looked lost and untethered. The $20 was long gone, spent on a single, vital meal. He had nothing left to offer. Nothing, except a corner of his own small, imperfect world. Taking a deep breath, he made a decision that would defy all logic but obey a higher law of the heart. "You can't go back out there," he said softly. "Our apartment isn't much, but we have a couch. It's warm. You can stay the night." The journey back to Leo's apartment was a slow, careful procession. He held Eleanor's arm, his grip firm and reassuring, while Lily walked on her other side, occasionally patting the old woman's hand as if to say, "It's all right, you're with us now." Their apartment building was old, the hallways dimly lit and smelling of dust and decades of cooking. For a moment, Leo felt a pang of embarrassment. He was bringing this woman, who held herself with such innate grace even in her worn-out clothes, into his world of peeling paint and rattling radiators. It was a world built on love, but it was a world of scarcity. He unlocked the door to Unit 3B and flicked on the light. The room was small but tidy. A worn floral-patterned couch sat against one wall, a testament to a time before his life had been monochrome. Toys were neatly stacked in a corner, and a few of Lily's vibrant drawings were taped to the refrigerator, splashes of defiant color in the muted space. On the wall, almost hidden in shadow, hung a single, framed architectural rendering, a beautiful, modern house with sweeping glass walls, a ghost of the man Leo used to be. Eleanor stepped inside, her blue eyes taking in everything. She saw the worn furniture, the mended curtains, the evidence of a life lived on the edge. But she also saw the love. She saw it in the way Lily immediately ran to grab a pillow and a thick quilt for her. She saw it in the way Leo's gaze softened every time he looked at his daughter. This was not a house, but it was a home. The initial awkwardness was palpable. Eleanor felt like an intruder, a burden on this kind man who clearly had so little to spare. Leo felt the weight of her unspoken history, the chasm of unknown sorrows that had led her to a park bench on a winter night. Once again, it was Lily who built the bridge. She climbed onto the couch next to Eleanor, who was now wrapped in the quilt, and opened a storybook. "Can you read this to me?" she asked, her voice full of earnest hope. "Daddy reads it sometimes, but he says my mommy used to do the voices better." The mention of her mother hung in the air for a moment, a note of soft melancholy. Eleanor looked at Leo, saw the flicker of pain in his eyes, and understood. She took the book. Her voice, though still a bit raspy, was melodic and expressive as she began to read. She gave the brave knight a booming voice and the clever princess a witty one. Lily was mesmerized, giggling and leaning her head against Eleanor's shoulder. Leo watched them from the small kitchenette, his heart aching with a bittersweet mix of joy and sorrow. For the first time in 5 years, the apartment was filled with a gentle, feminine energy that wasn't just a memory. It felt complete. Later, after Lily was tucked into bed, Leo made 2 cups of tea. He handed one to Eleanor. They sat in a comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the ticking of the clock and the groan of the building's old pipes. "You have a beautiful daughter," Eleanor said softly, breaking the silence. She's everything," Leo replied, his voice thick with emotion. "She has her mother's heart." A shared understanding of loss passed between them. It was then that Eleanor decided to offer a small piece of her own brokenness. "I have a daughter, too," she said, her gaze distant. "There was a misunderstanding. A terrible one. Someone came between us, twisted things. She thinks I abandoned her." Her words were vague, but the pain behind them was sharp and specific. "I'm sure she misses you," Leo said, offering the only comfort he could. "Sometimes people just need time to see the truth." He then found himself sharing a piece of his own story. "I was an architect," he confessed, gesturing vaguely toward the framed drawing on the wall. When she passed away, I couldn't do it anymore. Every line I drew felt like a lie. How can you design homes for happy families when your own has been shattered into a million pieces?" Eleanor's eyes followed his gesture to the drawing. She looked at it intently, her gaze sharp and discerning. She saw the clean lines, the innovative use of space, the harmony between structure and nature. It was more than a drawing, it was a vision. "You have a gift, Leo," she said, her voice firm. "A true gift. It's a shame to keep it buried." They talked for another hour, 2 people from different worlds finding common ground in the universal landscape of grief and love. He saw in her a resilience and wisdom that hardship had not dimmed. She saw in him a profound goodness and a dormant talent that the world had carelessly overlooked. As he finally said goodnight and retreated to the lumpy armchair he would sleep in, Leo felt a strange sense of peace. He had invited a stranger into his home, a stranger who represented another mouth to feed, another complication in his already complicated life. But as he drifted off to sleep, he realized he hadn't just given sanctuary. He had received it, too. The empty spaces in his home and in his heart felt a little less vast tonight. The next morning, in a different universe only miles away, Isabella Vance, CEO of Vance Development, stood in her penthouse apartment overlooking the city. From this height, the world was a neat, orderly grid. The chaos of the streets, the struggles of individual lives, were rendered invisible. Her apartment was a masterpiece of minimalist design, all glass, chrome, and stark white surfaces. It was less of a home and more of a gallery, curated to project an image of untouchable success and control. But inside, Isabella felt anything but in control. She was adrift in the sterile beauty she had created, a prisoner in a castle of her own making. Her success was a shield she used to protect a heart bruised by a deep, aching guilt and a loneliness so profound it was a physical presence in the room. She was looking at a photograph on her marble countertop. It was of her and her mother, Eleanor, taken years ago. They were laughing, their heads close together, the picture of a happy, unbreakable bond. A bond that was now, according to her fiancé Marcus, irreparably broken. Marcus entered the room, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, a confident smile playing on his lips. He was handsome, charming, and utterly devoted to her, or so she believed. He was her rock, the one who had guided her, helped her build her father's company into an empire after his death. He was also the one who had managed the situation with her mother. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, kissing her neck. Thinking about her again, he asked, his tone a careful blend of sympathy and gentle chiding. Isabella, my love, you have to let it go. We've been over this. I just feel so guilty, Marcus, she said, her voice small. She's in that facility, all alone. She won't see me. She thinks I chose the company over her. She's not alone, Marcus said smoothly, his voice a comforting lie. She is in the finest care facility in the state, with round-the-clock nurses and a beautiful garden. I check in with her doctors every week. They say she is comfortable. But her mind, Isabella, the dementia is progressing. They said visitors, especially you, would only agitate her. She needs peace. It's her way of pushing you away, of trying to punish you for being successful. You can't let her do it. Every word was a carefully crafted piece of a cruel architecture of deceit. The truth was far more sinister. There was no facility. There was no garden. There were no doctors. There was only Marcus's ambition, a bottomless pit of greed that saw Eleanor as an obstacle. He had systematically isolated Isabella from her mother, convincing her that Eleanor's occasional memory lapses were full-blown dementia, that her fierce independence was a sign of mental instability. He had used his power of attorney, which a grief-stricken Isabella had foolishly granted him, to seize control of Eleanor's assets and, eventually, to have her escorted from her own home with nothing but the clothes on her back. His plan was simple and monstrous: let the old woman be consumed by the city, and in her absence, he would have absolute control over Isabella and the Vance fortune. I'm just trying to protect you, he continued, stroking her hair. Your mother was a wonderful woman, but she's not the same person anymore. You need to focus on the future. Our future. He gestured around the vast, empty apartment. On the legacy you're building. Isabella leaned back against him, wanting to believe him, needing to believe him. His logic was a fortress against the tidal wave of her guilt. She had to believe he was right, because the alternative, that she had somehow failed her mother, that she had abandoned the one person who had always been her champion, was too devastating to contemplate. So she nodded, pushing the image of her mother's laughing face away. She put on her armor of a CEO, the mask of composure she wore so well. She allowed the walls around her heart to be reinforced by Marcus's soothing falsehoods, unaware that the foundation of her entire life was a lie, and that the mother she was mourning was not in a comfortable room, but was at that very moment sipping tea in a tiny apartment, her life saved by a man who had nothing, and yet was willing to give everything. The city below was shrouded in morning mist, hiding its secrets, its cruelties, and its small, miraculous acts of grace. A strange and gentle rhythm began to establish itself in the small apartment in Unit 3B. It was the rhythm of a family, a melody they were composing day by day. Eleanor, it turned out, was a natural matriarch. She rose early, her quiet presence a calming force in the morning rush. She would have a pot of coffee brewing by the time Leo emerged, bleary-eyed, from his armchair. She insisted on making Lily's breakfast, listening with rapt attention to the 7-year-old's elaborate dreams and a detailed accounting of her toys' latest adventures. For Leo, it was like waking up in a different life. The crushing weight of single parenthood, a burden he had carried with stoic resolve, was suddenly lighter. He wasn't just Leo, the sole provider and protector, he was part of a team. He found himself smiling more, the lines of worry around his eyes seeming to soften. He would come home from a grueling day at the construction site, covered in dust and weary to his bones, to the smell of a simple but delicious soup simmering on the stove and the sound of Lily and Eleanor laughing over a board game. These moments were bittersweet, painful reminders of the life he'd had with his wife, but they were also a balm to his wounded soul. They were proof that joy could exist again, that his home could be filled with more than just memories. One rainy afternoon, while Leo was at work and Lily was at school, Eleanor found herself tidying the small living room. Her movements were more certain now, her strength returning with each passing day of rest and proper nutrition. Her hand brushed against a cardboard tube tucked away behind the couch. Curious, she pulled it out. It was full of rolled-up schematics and drawings. She carefully unrolled one on the coffee table. It was the original, hand-drawn blueprint for the glass house in the frame. But there were others. Designs for libraries that seemed to float on air, for schools built in harmony with nature, for public parks that were works of art. She saw not just buildings, but philosophies. She saw a deep, profound understanding of how space could shape human connection. She saw the soul of the architect, a man who believed in light, openness, and community. She was holding the buried treasure of Leo's past life. That evening, as Leo was drying dishes, Eleanor brought one of the drawings to him. "This is who you are, Leo," she said, her voice soft but firm. "This is a gift. You cannot let grief be its tomb." Leo looked at the drawing, his own handwriting, his own vision from a lifetime ago. A wave of pain and longing washed over him. "That man is gone, Eleanor," he said quietly. "He died with her." "No," Eleanor insisted, her blue eyes piercing his. "He's right here. He's just sleeping. He's the man who stopped for a stranger on a bench. The man who builds a fortress of love for his daughter in a tiny apartment. Don't you see? You never stopped building. You just stopped using paper." Her words resonated deep within him. A few days later, Eleanor was looking through a newspaper she'd found in the building's lobby. An article caught her eye. Vance Development announces ambitious new downtown community center. A photo of a smiling, professional woman stood beside the headline. It was Isabella. Eleanor's breath hitched. A complex storm of emotions brewed within her, a fierce, surging pride in her daughter's success, a sharp, stabbing pain of their estrangement, and a hot, righteous anger at the man who had engineered it all. But then another thought emerged, clear and powerful. She looked from her daughter's picture to the stack of Leo's drawings on the coffee table. An idea, audacious and brilliant, began to form. She brought the newspaper to Leo. "Look," she said, pointing to the article. "They're building a community center. The design they've shown, it's cold. It's a box of steel and glass. It has no heart." She then pointed to his own drawings. "You know what a community center should be. It should be a place where a lonely old woman can find warmth. Where a single father can find support. Where a little girl can learn to pause. She looked him directly in the eye, her gaze unwavering. Your gift isn't meant to be buried, Leo. It's meant to build hope for others. Dust off your past. Show them what a real community looks like. For the first time in 5 years, a flicker of the old fire returned to Leo's eyes. The architect within him, long dormant, began to stir. He looked at Eleanor, this woman who had drifted into his life like a lost leaf and had somehow become an oak. He looked at Lily, sleeping soundly in her room. He thought about the soulless buildings he helped construct every day, monuments to commerce and not connection. That night, for the first time since his wife's death, Leo sat down at the small kitchen table. He unrolled a fresh sheet of paper, picked up a pencil, and began to draw. He wasn't just designing a building, he was sketching a new future. The decision was terrifying. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, preparing to leap with wings made of paper and hope. For days, Leo worked tirelessly every night after Lily was asleep, fueled by black coffee and Eleanor's unwavering encouragement. The kitchen table became his studio. The half-forgotten language of lines, angles, and elevations came rushing back to him, but this time it was different. His designs were infused with a new depth, a compassion born from his own pain and his recent experiences. He designed a community center with a sun-drenched atrium where seniors could gather, a soundproofed library for quiet contemplation, a vibrant art studio with walls just waiting for the messy masterpieces of children, and a rooftop garden that would be a green oasis in the concrete desert. It wasn't just a building, it was an embrace. It was everything he and Lily and Eleanor needed, rendered in graphite and ink. You have to show this to her, Eleanor urged, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement as she looked at the finished presentation boards. To your daughter? Leo asked. Yes. To the CEO of Vance Development, Eleanor confirmed, her expression unreadable. This is too good to remain a dream in this apartment. And so, armed with his portfolio and a heart hammering against his ribs, Leo took a day off from work, a day's pay he couldn't afford to lose, and ventured into the belly of the beast. Vance Development was housed in a skyscraper that seemed to pierce the clouds, a monument of reflective glass and cold, hard steel. It was a world away from his dusty construction sites and his humble apartment. Just stepping into the lobby felt like a transgression. The air was different here, cool, still, and scented with money. The floors were polished marble that reflected his worn work boots, making him feel clumsy and out of place. He approached the reception desk, a massive slab of granite presided over by a woman with a perfectly sculpted expression of polite disdain. "Can I help you?" she asked, her eyes flicking over his simple clothes, her tone suggesting she very much doubted it. "Yes," Leo said, his voice sounding small in the cavernous space. "I'd like to see Ms. Vance. I have a design proposal for the new community center." The receptionist's lips curved into a semblance of a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but Ms. Vance doesn't see anyone without an appointment," she cut him off, her voice crisp and final. "Her schedule is planned months in advance. If you'd like, you can leave your proposal, and if our acquisitions team is interested, they will contact you." She gestured vaguely to a pile of similar portfolios on a side table, a graveyard of unsolicited dreams. Leo knew what that meant. His work, his heart, his hope, would be unceremoniously discarded. "Could you just let her know I'm here? My name is Leo. It's very important." "Everyone believes their business is important," the receptionist said, her patience clearly wearing thin. She gestured to a large, imposing security guard. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The guard moved toward him, his expression impassive. Humiliation washed over Leo, hot and sharp. He had been a fool to think this could work. He was just a construction worker with delusions of grandeur. He turned to leave, his portfolio feeling like a lead weight in his hands. But at that exact moment, the glass doors slid open, and Isabella Vance swept into the lobby. She was a vision of corporate power, dressed in a sharp, elegant suit, her face a mask of composed authority. She was on her phone, her voice tense. "No, Marcus, that's unacceptable. The numbers don't add up. We'll discuss it when I'm upstairs." She wasn't looking where she was going. As she passed, the corner of her briefcase brushed against Lily, who had insisted on coming for moral support and was standing quietly by her father's side. The slight impact caused Lily to lose her grip on the drawing she was holding. The single sheet of paper fluttered through the air, dancing on an invisible current before landing directly at Isabella's feet, face up. Annoyed by the interruption, Isabella ended her call and stooped to pick up the paper, intending to hand it back with a dismissive word. But she paused. Her eyes fell upon the drawing. It was a child's simple, heartfelt creation. A tall man with a kind smile, a little girl with pigtails holding his hand, and an old woman with bright blue eyes, all standing together under a wobbly, smiling sun. At the bottom, written in large, colorful, slightly crooked letters, were two words, "Our family." A strange, unexpected pang went through her. Something about the old woman's face in the drawing, the artist had even captured the clear blue of her eyes, was hauntingly familiar. She looked up from the paper, her gaze landing on Lily, and then on the man with the worn-out boots and the defeated slump in his shoulders, who was now being gently but firmly guided toward the door by the security guard. For one brief, electric second, their eyes met across the vast marble expanse. And in his, Isabella saw not the threat her security team saw, but a deep, weary sadness that resonated with the hollow ache in her own heart. The image lingered in Isabella's mind long after she had ascended in the silent, swift elevator to her penthouse office. The man's eyes, the child's drawing, the inexplicable jolt of familiarity when she'd looked at the crudely drawn face of the old woman. She had dismissed it, of course. She had told the guard, "It's fine, let him go," with a wave of her hand, and had continued on her way, the business of her empire demanding her full attention. But the image refused to fade. It was like a stone tossed into the still, carefully managed pond of her consciousness, its ripples spreading wider and wider. In her sterile office, surrounded by panoramic views of the city she had conquered, she felt a profound and unsettling disquiet. She found herself pacing, unable to focus on the spreadsheets and reports glowing on her screen. The drawing was still in her hand. She had pocketed it without thinking. She smoothed it out on her vast mahogany desk. A man, a girl, and an old woman. Our family. A found family, it seemed. A little girl's wish, perhaps. But the woman, those blue eyes, they were her mother's eyes. It was absurd. A coincidence. A child's random choice of crayon color. Her mother, she reminded herself, was in a comfortable facility, safe and cared for. Marcus had assured her. Marcus. She sat down, her chair sighing softly. She thought of his call that morning, the tension in his voice when she'd questioned the numbers on a new acquisition. It wasn't the first time she'd felt a subtle resistance from him when she delved too deep into the company's financials, a smooth redirection of her attention. She had always dismissed it as him trying to shield her from the more tedious aspects of the business. But now, seen through the lens of this new, unexplainable anxiety, it felt different. It felt secretive. On a sudden, inexplicable impulse, she picked up her phone. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled up the contact information Marcus had given her months ago. The Evergreen Meadows senior residence. She had never called directly. Marcus had always insisted on being the sole point of contact, to avoid confusion and to protect her from Eleanor's potentially hurtful episodes. She had accepted this, believing it was for the best. Now, it felt like a cage. She pressed the call button. The phone rang 3 times before a cheerful voice answered. Evergreen Meadows, this is Brenda speaking. How may I help you? Hello, Isabella said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm calling to inquire about one of your residents. Eleanor Vance. There was a pause, and the sound of a keyboard clicking. Vance, you said? VANCE? Yes, that's correct. More clicking. The silence stretched on, filled only by the frantic beating of Isabella's own heart. I'm sorry, ma'am, the receptionist finally said. We have no one by that name here. I've checked our current residents and our records for the past year. There's no Eleanor Vance. The words hit Isabella with the force of a physical impact. No, that can't be right, she stammered. She would have been admitted about 6 months ago. She's in her late 60s, silver hair, blue eyes. I'm very sorry, ma'am. I have no record of her. Are you sure you have the right facility? Isabella didn't answer. She slowly lowered the phone, her hand shaking. No record. It wasn't possible. Marcus had shown her brochures. He had read her fabricated reports from doctors. He had described the room, the garden, the nurses. All of it. A lie. The sterile, quiet office suddenly felt like a vacuum, sucking the air from her lungs. The foundation of her trust, the bedrock of the life she had been living for the past 6 months, cracked. A single, terrifying fissure that threatened to bring the entire elaborate structure of her world crashing down. She looked back at the drawing on her desk. The old woman with the blue eyes. The man with the sad, kind face. The little girl. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. A sign from a universe she had long stopped listening to. The truth wasn't in a comfortable care facility. The truth was out there, somewhere in the cold, chaotic city below, and she had just let it walk out of her lobby. The first crack in the wall around her heart had appeared, and through it, a sliver of horrifying, undeniable light was pouring in. The world tilted on its axis. The clear, sharp lines of Isabella's reality blurred into a nauseating chaos. The phone call had been a detonation, and she was now standing in the epicenter of its blast, surrounded by the smoking ruins of her trust in Marcus. For a few moments, she was paralyzed by the sheer scale of the deception. It was too monstrous to comprehend. Marcus, her partner, her fiancé, the man she was going to marry, had lied to her about her own mother. Why? The question hammered at her, demanding an answer. Greed was the only logical, sickening conclusion. Her mother's assets. Her own inheritance. A cold, calculated plan to seize control. The thought was so vile it made her physically ill. The mask of the calm, collected CEO shattered. Grief, guilt, and a white-hot rage she hadn't felt in years surged through her. She had been a fool. A blind, trusting fool, so wrapped up in her work and her own sorrow that she had allowed a wolf into her home, into her heart. He had preyed on her vulnerability, turning her love for her mother into a weapon against them both. But the paralysis of shock quickly gave way to a ferocious, laser-focused determination. Her mother was out there. Alone. Where? The drawing. It was her only clue. The man and the little girl. She had let them go. A fresh wave of panic seized her. How could she possibly find them in a city of millions? She buzzed her assistant. Sarah, cancel all my meetings for the rest of the day. But Ms. Vance, you have the quarterly review with the board, cancel them, Isabella repeated, her voice like ice. There was a new authority in her tone, one that brooked no argument. She then called the head of her building's security. John, this is Isabella Vance. I need the security footage from the main lobby, from approximately 30 minutes ago. I need you to isolate an interaction between myself, a man in a construction jacket, and a small girl. Get me a clear image of the man's face. I need to identify him. This is the highest priority. I want the image on my desk in 10 minutes. She was no longer just a grieving daughter, she was a CEO, wielding her power not for profit, but for a desperate, personal mission. While she waited, she began her own digital excavation. She plunged into the web of corporate and legal documents that Marcus had so carefully managed. She used her executive access to bypass the firewalls he had erected, peeling back layers of shell corporations and obscure trust funds. What she found was a methodical, systematic plundering. He had leveraged her mother's portfolio, transferred assets, and, most damningly, had used his power of attorney to have her legally declared incompetent and destitute, effectively erasing her from the system. He hadn't just put her out, he had made it so no one would look for her. He had turned her into a ghost. The security chief arrived with a tablet. On the screen was a crystal-clear image of Leo, his face etched with disappointment and humility as he was being led away. His eyes, even in the still image, held that same profound sadness she had recognized. Run facial recognition. Cross-reference with every database we have access to. Employment records, city registries, social media. I don't care what it takes. Find him, she commanded. The hours that followed were an agony of waiting. Isabella paced her office like a caged tigress, the city lights beginning to glitter outside as day turned to night. Each passing minute was a torment, filled with horrific imaginings of what her mother might be enduring. She pictured her cold, hungry, alone on a bench, the very image that had likely inspired the child's drawing. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had been living in a glass tower while her mother was fighting for survival on the streets. Finally, her phone rang. It was the head of security. We found him, Ms. Vance. His name is Leo Martinez. He works for a downtown construction firm. We have an address. An address. A single, solid point in the swirling chaos. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through her. She scribbled it down. It was in a working-class neighborhood across town, a part of the city she usually only saw from her office window. Thank you, John. You've done well. She hung up and stood for a moment, gathering herself. The next step was the most terrifying of all. What would she find? Would her mother even be there? Would she be too late? She grabbed her keys and her coat, leaving the drawing of our family on her desk. She was no longer just looking for a man and a child. She was looking for her mother. She was looking for a way to forgive herself. As she walked out of her silent, empty office, she left the life she knew behind. She was descending from her tower, not as a CEO, but as a daughter, about to step into the messy, unpredictable, and ultimately more real world where her only hope resided. The drive across town was a journey through different worlds. Isabella's luxury sedan, usually a silent cocoon of leather and polished wood, felt alien as it navigated the grittier, more vibrant streets of Leo's neighborhood. Here, buildings were not sterile towers but brick walk-ups with fire escapes zigzagging down their faces. Life spilled out onto the sidewalks. The air was thick with the scent of street food and the sounds of music and laughter from open doorways. It was a world away from her own, and for the first time, she felt like the outsider, the intruder. She found the address, a plain, slightly worn-out apartment building that looked just like all the others on the block. She parked her car, which looked conspicuously out of place, and took a deep breath. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. This was it. She walked up the concrete steps and into the dimly lit lobby. A directory on the wall pointed her to Unit 3B, L. Martinez. Climbing the 3 flights of stairs, her expensive heels clicked loudly in the quiet stairwell, announcing her arrival. Each step was a prayer. Please let her be here. Please let her be safe. She reached the 3rd floor and found the door. 3B, it was a simple wooden door, the paint slightly chipped at the edges. She could hear the faint sound of a television inside, and a child's laughter. For a moment, she froze, her hand hovering before the wood. What if she was wrong? What if this was all a wild goose chase, a delusion born of guilt and panic? But the image of the drawing, of the blue eyes, pushed her forward. She raised her hand and knocked. The sound was deafening in the hallway. The laughter inside stopped. She heard footsteps, and then the sound of a lock turning. The door opened. It was him. Leo. He looked different here, in his own space. He wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, and the weariness she'd seen in his eyes in the lobby was still there, but it was softened, tempered by the warmth of his home. His eyes widened in recognition, a look of pure astonishment on his face. "You," he began, his voice a bewildered whisper. He thought he was in some kind of trouble, that the powerful CEO had tracked him down to reprimand him for his audacity. But Isabella barely saw him. Her gaze shot past him, into the small, tidy living room. And there, sitting on the worn floral couch, bathed in the soft glow of a lamp, was her mother. Eleanor. She looked older, frilier than Isabella remembered, but it was her. Unmistakably her. Her silver hair, her proud posture, and her eyes, those clear, beautiful blue eyes that had haunted Isabella's dreams. Eleanor's head snapped up at the sound of the open door. Her teacup clattered in its saucer as she saw who was standing in the doorway. The color drained from her face. "Isabella," she breathed, her voice a fragile mix of shock and disbelief. The world stopped. For a heart-stopping second, the three of them were frozen in a tableau of impossible reunion. Then, the dam of Isabella's composure broke. A choked sob escaped her lips. "Mom," she cried, the word tearing from her throat, raw and full of 1,000 apologies. She stumbled forward, into the apartment, her eyes locked on her mother. Leo instinctively stepped back, his mind struggling to process the scene unfolding before him. The CEO. The old woman he had saved. They were mother and daughter. The secret Eleanor had hinted at, the misunderstanding, was this. This chasm of pain and wealth and lies that he had unwittingly stepped into. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor asked, her voice gaining a sharp, protective edge. The hurt of months of perceived abandonment was a shield she raised instantly. "How did you find me?" "I was wrong," Isabella wept, falling to her knees in front of the couch, heedless of the worn carpet. She reached for her mother's hands, which Eleanor instinctively pulled away. "Mom, please. I didn't know. He lied to me. He told me you were in a facility. He said you didn't want to see me." The words tumbled out in a frantic, incoherent rush. She explained everything, the lies about dementia, the fake facility, Marcus's complete and utter betrayal. As Eleanor listened, the hard, protective shell around her began to soften. She saw the genuine anguish on her daughter's face, the self-recrimination in her eyes. This was not the cold, ambitious daughter Marcus had described. This was her child, lost and hurting. At that moment, Lily, who had been watching from the doorway of her room with wide, curious eyes, walked over. She saw Isabella crying, saw the pain on everyone's faces. She did what children do, she sought to mend. She took Isabella's trembling hand in one of her small ones, and Eleanor's in the other. She looked between the two crying women. "It's okay," Lily said, her voice the only calm thing in the room. "Daddy says broken pieces can be put back together. He says sometimes they're even stronger than before." The simple, profound wisdom of the child cut through the storm of adult emotion. Eleanor looked at her daughter, truly looked at her, and saw the truth. She reached out and pulled Isabella into a fierce, long overdue embrace. They clung to each other, years of silence and sorrow melting away in a flood of tears. In the middle of this sacred, chaotic reunion, Isabella's rage returned, cold and clear. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. She looked at Leo, her expression shifting from grief to gratitude to a steely resolve. "He will pay for this," she said, her voice low and dangerous. She pulled out her phone. The first call was to her head of security. The second was to the police. The confrontation she had set in motion was about to arrive at her fiancé's doorstep. Justice was coming. The aftermath was swift and decisive, executed with the clinical precision of a corporate takeover. While Isabella, Eleanor, and Leo waited in the surreal quiet of the small apartment, a world away Marcus was celebrating his impending victory at an upscale restaurant. He was raising a glass of champagne to his associates, toasting the finalization of a deal that would cement his control over Vance Development. He never saw it coming. Isabella's security team, accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers, entered the restaurant. The hushed elegance of the room was shattered. They approached his table, the expressions on their faces grim and unyielding. The charges were read aloud for all to hear: fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse, unlawful imprisonment. Marcus's charming smile dissolved into a mask of disbelief, then rage. His protests were loud but hollow. The arrogance that had been his shield for so long was useless against the cold, hard evidence Isabella had unearthed. He was handcuffed and led out of the restaurant, past the shocked and staring faces of the city's elite, his empire crumbling to dust with every humiliating step. Back in Unit 3B, the news of his arrest arrived via a simple text message to Isabella's phone. A chapter of their lives, dark and poisonous, was finally closed. In its place, a new one was beginning, tentative and fragile. The rest of the night was spent talking. The whole, ugly truth came out piece by painful piece. Eleanor described the day men came to her house, the confusion, the fear, and the utter desolation of being left on the street with nothing. Isabella, in turn, confessed her own blindness, her guilt at being so easily manipulated, at prioritizing her work over her instincts. Leo and Lily were silent, respectful witnesses to this raw, painful, and necessary healing. They were the anchors in the storm, their quiet presence a testament to the fact that even in the darkest of nights, goodness could still be found. As the first light of dawn began to streak the sky, a sense of exhausted peace settled over the small apartment. Eleanor was safe. The bond with her daughter, though scarred, was being reforged. But the future was a vast, uncertain landscape. "You can't stay here," Isabella said, looking around the small apartment that had been her mother's sanctuary. The words came out wrong, sounding dismissive. "I mean," she quickly corrected herself, looking at Leo with profound gratitude, "this place, what you did, you saved her life. But my mother, you both, you deserve more." She then turned her attention to the portfolio of architectural drawings still sitting on the kitchen table. During a lull in the emotional storm, Eleanor had insisted on showing them to her. Isabella, an expert in development and design, had flipped through them in stunned silence. They were brilliant. Not just competent, but visionary. They were full of the very thing her own company's projects so often lacked: soul. "This community center," Isabella said, tapping the main drawing. "The design my firm approved, it's a box. It's what Marcus wanted. Efficient, cold, profitable. But this," she looked at Leo, really seeing him for the first time not as a construction worker or a savior, but as an artist. "This is a home. It's a heart for the community." A decision clicked into place, as clear and certain as her decision to find her mother. "I'm scrapping our design," she announced. "I want you to build this. I want you to be the lead architect." Leo was speechless. He stared at her, then at Eleanor, then at his own drawings, as if he couldn't connect the 3 realities. I'm a construction worker," he stammered. "I haven't been an architect in years." "You never stopped being one," Isabella said, echoing Eleanor's words. "Vance Development is starting a new division. One focused on humanitarian projects, on building communities, not just buildings. I want you to run it. With me." It was more than a job offer. It was an invitation into a new life. It was a chance to rebuild his own shattered world. A montage of the following months would show this new life taking shape. We would see Isabella and her mother moving into a warm, beautiful new home, filled not with minimalist art, but with laughter and Lily's colorful drawings. We would see Eleanor, her strength and spirit fully returned, teaching Lily how to bake in a sunlit kitchen. We would see Leo and Isabella, leaning over a drafting table together, their heads close, their hands occasionally brushing. The professional partnership slowly, naturally, blossomed into something more. They were 2 people who had been broken by life in different ways, who found in each other the missing pieces of their own souls. We would see the triumphant groundbreaking ceremony for the new community center, with Leo at the podium, Isabella by his side, and Lily and Eleanor in the front row, a complete family. The climax of this new beginning comes a year later, on a perfect autumn day in the rooftop garden of the newly completed Leo Martinez Community Center. It is a vibrant, thriving space, full of life and light, just as he had envisioned. Leo, now a confident, fulfilled man, turns to Isabella. He takes her hand. "A year ago," he says, his voice full of emotion, "I was a man who had forgotten how to build. And you were a woman who was afraid to feel at home. We were both lost." He gets down on one knee. He pulls out a small, simple box. "Isabella Vance, you and your mother and my daughter, you've rebuilt my world. You are my home. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy stream down Isabella's face as she says yes, and as they kiss, surrounded by the community they built together, we see that Lily was right. The broken pieces, once reassembled with love and kindness, had created something stronger and more beautiful than ever before. What you have just witnessed is a story about the extraordinary power of a single, simple choice. It is a reminder that in a world that often encourages us to look away, to hurry past, to protect what little we have, the most courageous and revolutionary act is to stop. To see. To help. Leo had next to nothing, but he offered everything he had: his jacket, his last few dollars, the safety of his home. He didn't do it for a reward. He did it because his heart told him it was the right thing to do. And in doing so, he set in motion a series of events that not only saved a life but healed a family, exposed a villain, and resurrected his own forgotten dreams. This story teaches us that true wealth is not measured by the size of our bank accounts or the height of our office buildings, but by the depth of our compassion. It reminds us that everyone we meet is fighting a battle we know nothing about, and a small act of kindness can be the reinforcements they desperately need. It shows us that we should never judge a person by their circumstances. The forgotten old woman on the bench was a beloved mother, and the humble construction worker was a brilliant architect. Everyone has a story, everyone has value. We live in a world that can often feel cold and indifferent, much like the city at the start of our story. But every single one of us has the power to be a Leo. We have the power to offer a coat, a kind word, a helping hand. We have the power to be the light that breaks through someone else's darkness. And as this story shows, when you give that light freely, it has a miraculous way of illuminating your own path home. What did you feel when Leo decided to help Eleanor? Let us know in the comments below. Your reflections are a part of this community we are building together. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more inspirational stories, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that kindness is never, ever wasted. Thank you for watching.